Welcome everybody on this Monday afternoon to our needle felting class. My name's Claire. I'll be hanging out in the chat here with you, answering any questions you have or passing them on to Darren. He's your teacher there on screen, showing off his adorable gnome collection. Hopefully you have all received the handout. If not, I'll be putting it in the chat here so you can get that. I'll put a link in there for mobile users as well. And just a reminder that the class is being recorded so you can watch it back again and again later if you need to. And now that all of that is out of the way, we'll let Darren take over.
Okay, welcome to class. Today we are going to have an introduction to
All right, thank you so much, Eric. Here's a quick look at some of the stories we're tracking for your month.
Apologies, everybody. I think we're having some difficulties with the mute settings here. Darren should be muted, but the rest of us should be.
Yeah, let me get, I don't know how that happened.
Saying that all eyes are on the variant. On your news at 5, I'll show you the bar in Charlottesville. It's Bell Query, NBC 29 News at 4.
Yeah. Okay. Where's this? Okay, let me just. Darren. Can you unmute, Darren?
Yes, is it good now?
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank goodness. And nobody else should be able to talk right now except for me and you.
All right, perfect.
Okay.
Maybe Claire should be able to answer questions as they
Claire.
come up.
Okay.
Yes,
I've got
can still unmute myself.
Sorry about that, everybody. I don't know what the settings were set to, but we're all good now, I think.
Okay, perfect. Is the spotlight on my hands now? The view of my hand should be.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So needle felting, you do need some specific tools to do needle felting. The first thing that you do need are needle felting. These needle felting tools are very, very nice and very helpful. This one, I did break one of the needles in this one. It only has 2 in it, but this one should have, it can hold up to 3. You can hold 2, 3, or even just 1 needle in this one, but it does hold up to 3. This one, I'm going to push back the guard. This one holds up to 5 needles, and this one has all 5 in it. The reason it's nice to have 5 needles is because every time you work with this tool, you get 5 times more benefit if you work with just 1 needle compared to working with 5 needles. And so sometimes it's nice to be able to cover a lot of ground very quickly with 5 needles. You do need something to work into. So I've got this needle felting brush. So these 2 tools and the brush are from Clover. So you can buy these on, I think Michaels.com has these, lionbrand.com has them, but they are made by Clover. So you do need needle felting tools, something to work into. If you don't want to buy the brush, you could use a piece of upholstery foam. Something like this will work really fine as well too. So you might have something around the house that you can use. When you're starting a new hobby, it's nice if you don't have to go out and buy everything because sometimes it can get rather expensive. This little tool here is also made by Clover. You can use it to clean your mat. And then this little rake here, you can kind of hold it in place while you're working, and it kind of protects your finger. So you don't have to try to hold it with your finger. You can kind of use that. So that's what this is kind of handy to have. The needles, let's look at these needles. And they come in a little case like this when you buy them. So close up on these needles. The light right on them. I don't know if you can see. So the needles are a special type of needle. You can kind of see they have little jagged spurs on them, little barbs or kind of notches. See, right there, you can kind of see. If you look at them really close, you can see them if you get a set of them. And that is what causes the felting to work. So it's not just a smooth needle. As it goes through your project into the fibers, these little barbs, they cause the fibers to twist together, to push together. They become incorporated with each other, and that's what turns it into felt. So these are the felting needles. So it's a very specific type of needle. You can't just use a standard sewing needle or like pins that are smooth. You have to have these special needles. You can get these, I know michaels.com has these and lionbrand.com has them as well. So you don't really need the felting tools. You can just use the needle, but you do need to get some of that. These needles do break very, very often. And if you break them, you unscrew it, and then you remove the broken ones, and then you just pop the new ones right in. So I'm just going to put all 5 back in. You can see it's easy to change the needles. Just put them right in. I recommend I put a little piece of fiber in here because it helps to keep it from rattling around as much. And it makes a little bit less noise. So if you're working in a room with other people, it'll be a little less annoying for them. So that's how you change the needles for this one. And the pen is the same. You just take it apart. Whoops, not right there. You just screw it apart, and then you go ahead and replace the one that's broken. Pop that one out. It's kind of stuck. Any questions while I'm trying to get this loose needle out? Questions about anything, Claire? How are we doing?
That's a good tip about putting the extra fiber in the end of the larger tool. I never thought of that before.
Yes, I've annoyed some people in the past, so that proved to be quite helpful. Okay, so then you just have to line these needles up in their little grooves and then screw it back together. This one fits tighter and they don't rattle around so much. And now I'm ready to have all 3 of my needles. So this is pretty much the tools that you need to get started. I also recommend getting some type of carding brushes. Carding, C-A-R-D-I-N-G, is a technique that's used to brush out raw wool fibers when you're preparing them for spinning. But you can also use them in a situation like this where we're going to be blending fibers, you can blend colors, we're going to be turning yarn into roving so that we can use yarn that we already have. So these are just brushes that I bought at a pet store. So these are my cat's brushes. He doesn't really like to be brushed, so he doesn't mind if I use them. But if you're going to get really serious about it, you can buy these brushes. These are called carding brushes. These are proper ones, and they're quite expensive. I think these are about $50 or $60. So, you don't have to have these at first. You can just get some pet brushes, and that's a good subject. That'll kind of get you started until you decide whether or not you want to invest in these. Okay. So most people, when they talk about felting, want you to use roving. And so this is just a roving. It's unspun wool that is prepared in this method so that it's easy you can pull out a bit of it and it can be spun into yarn. So that's the idea of why it's like this, because you can spin it into yarn, or you can use it for wet felting, or you can use it for needle felting. Roving is not as easily available or readily available as yarn is. And sometimes it can be very expensive. When you're buying roving, you have to be careful because it might be cashmere, it might be Angora, it might be like 100% merino. So sometimes it's going to be very, very expensive. So you want to make sure that you're not spending like a great deal of money on merino roving when you're going to be making a needle felted gnome. You could just use a regular standard wool. So just double check and make sure you're being careful about what you're buying. But for our purposes today, I'm going to show you how to use regular yarn that's available at most of your craft stores. This is Hometown by Lion Brand Yarn, and Hometown Bonus Bundle is available on michaels.com or lionbrand.com. And I'm going to show you how to use regular yarn and turn that into roving. And then that way you can use up scraps of yarn that you have at home, or you can just buy yarn at places you already shop and you don't have to go out and buy roving. So what you want to do is cut your yarn into small pieces like this.
Darren.
Okay.
Before we get into exactly how to needle felt, could you talk about the difference between needle felting and wet felting? We have a question from someone who says that don't you have to use wool for felting?
Haha, yes. So the answer to that question is yes and no. When you're wet felting is a complete different process. Wet felting is when you take roving or wool pieces, and they do have to be on 100% wool, and they have to be untreated wool. So they can't be like superwash wool. If you're wet felting, you do need wool. But for our purposes today, for our class, you can use acrylic, you can use all kinds of fibers, which makes it super accessible. You don't have to buy anything special. Really, the only thing that doesn't work well are plant fibers, because the plant fibers tend to be very stiff. And frequently, cotton yarn that's intended to be knitted with can be mercerized or treated with something that makes it very hard for the needles to pass through it. But even still, with cotton, I brought these just to show you. If you have a cotton ball, you can actually needle felt with this. And I'll do some demonstrations to show you. But you can definitely use acrylic for felting, with needle felting. This little guy is 100% acrylic. I made the felt that he's wearing in this shirt out of this exact same fiber. So needle felting, I always say the needles are made by magic gnomes, and that's why it works. So I'm not sure what the scientific method is behind it, but the magic gnome theory is what I go with. So cut your yarn into little strips, and then if you brush it like this, you can see it brushes it out into a roving type fiber. And then that way you can just go to Michael's, just buy regular yarn, and you'll be good to go. So just keep brushing it until it's the consistency that you want. And set that aside. So there's not really anything special happening. You're just brushing the fibers out. And then one thing you can do, you can also mix it. I'm going to mix it with some of this wool roving I have. And that way you can change the color. So we can kind of make a pink by mixing the red and the white together. And you just really have to just keep working it to get it incorporated together as much as possible. See, I'm kind of getting this pink row. So you can do a lot of color blending, and you can mix fibers, you can mix wool and acrylic, you could mix anything that you have available. So you can see if I kept blending that, I could get a really nice pink, but sometimes it's nice to have the variations in it. So any questions about that or anything? So this is called carding. And again, the carding brushes do make it a lot easier. So if you're going to go in production, making a lot of these for gifts, or if you're going to make them to sell online, you might want to get the carding brushes. But in the meantime, these little pet brushes work out really, really well. Okay. Any questions before we move on?
No questions here.
So I'm going to show you how to start constructing the body of the gnome. And I've got all of this fiber already brushed out and prepared. So a lot of times, a lot of videos that I watch online about how to do needle felting, what they want you to do is to start out with the roving and to kind of compress it into a small, a tight little ball like that, and start working it like this and turning it into a felt ball. And if you keep working it, it will turn into felt. And then you just keep adding more and more to it and build it up to the shape that you want. I don't have that kind of time. I have things to do, right? So what I like to do is I will, instead of starting with the loose roving, I will start with the same yarn that I'm going to make my project out of. And I'll make little balls of yarn. This is kind of like an oblong egg shape. And that way I can start out. So like this is the head, so you just make a ball of yarn out of a similar color as to what you're going to use. And then that you got a head start. It's going to save you a lot of time. So all you do is just unravel your yarn. And when you start winding it, instead of winding it into a ball, you can kind of start out on a kind of a longer shape so that it's not really going to be a ball, because we want the body to be more kind of egg-shaped or more oblong. And you doesn't matter if it's shaped perfectly, but you do want it kind of shaped, you know, roughly into the shape that you want it to be, because you can reshape it when you're felting. So you just kind of keep, see how I'm just winding it on to kind of start to create the shape I want. And then you would just keep going until you make it as big as in proper shape as you want. So, and then I just took some red and covered the top of it in red to show what's where the shirt is going to be. And then this will be the bottom part, which will be the pants. So that's how I like to start it. I like to start it with, this is a good way to use up your scrap yarn. But you want to try to use a color that's either similar to the color that the final piece is going to be, or even if you use the same yarn to make the inside base, it makes it a lot easier later when you're trying to cover it with fiber. So, all right, any questions about how to kind of set the shape and how to kind of create this under base that's going to end up being your gnome? Any questions about why I did that or how that will take shape? Questions?
Nope.
Nope. It's
Looks
really
like
straight.
Linda and I were on the same thought that using the making the little base beforehand is a good way to use up some odds and ends you might have.
Yeah, it's a great way to, now that gives you an excuse to say, oh, that bag of yarn you were going to throw away because it was too small to be used for anything. Now that gives you a reason to save it, because you can always find a use for it now. All right, so then I'm going to take this red fluffy, this roving that I prepared, and I'm going to just kind of smooth it out on there. And I'm going to start working it. So this kind of like holds it in place. As soon as you start working with the needles, whenever the needles go in and back out, you are moving and directing fiber. So even though I've only done that a few times there, it's actually attached. So you can see it's not attached real well yet, but it actually starts to become attached. And then the more you go over it and over it and over it, then it actually becomes part of all the same piece. So it becomes one solid piece instead of two separate pieces. But at first you might just want to go over it to kind of get everything kind of lightly go over it to get, and then I use my hand like this to smooth it out. And then hold it. You don't want to hit your hand. You want to be extra careful. And I will caution you, this might not be the best activity for little children. These needles are very sharp and it's very easy to stab yourself in the hand. I've done it before where I stabbed it through like this fatty part of my thumb. It really hurts. So like little tiny fingers, if this needle would hit little tiny fingers, it really could be an upsetting situation. So I don't recommend this for little kids. What do you think, Claire? Would you do this with little kids or no?
Definitely not.
I've always been when my kids were little, I was always overprotective. I would have not, older children, I think it would be fine. So you just keep going until it's all attached and you get a nice coverage. When I'm making mine, like I don't want to see the texture of this yarn that's underneath. So I would just keep covering it until I couldn't see that texture. So I can kind of see that texture right here. So I might, put another little coating right there. And then that gives me a nice coverage. So it's really straightforward. Most of the things we're going to cover today in the needle felting, it seems like when you're looking at it, it seems like it should be very complicated or have a lot of, different steps or different things you have to do, but it's actually very, very straightforward. Once you get into it, you can just really see. And you can see it's actually like just quickly going over it, it's already felting and being incorporated into the base. I would, however, after I get it all covered, go over it really, really well. I like my needle felted items to be very firm so that they'll hold their shape. And if you work them really, really well, you can make them so that they're not even super fuzzy. So like if you look at this one that I finished, you can pull up fuzz on it, but it still holds its shape underneath. So it's, it's nice and solid. So depending on the level of firmness that you want, you can either keep going or you can make it very firm and very dense, or you can allow it to be softer and fluffier. So that is kind of up to the fiber artist making it. So I could probably stop right there because it is holding its shape, but I would probably want mine to be a little bit more solid.
When you're covering, when you're covering a large area like this, is it best to sort of work, in an even fashion, or if you skipped around from place to place, would that create a weird texture or lumpiness or anything?
I don't think it could. When I do it, I usually do it like this, where I'm just kind of going kind of evenly all the way around. If you work it really, really hard in one spot, like if I were to work it really, really hard here and then go over here and start working it, what can happen is every time the needles go through, they're pushing fibers, they're moving the fibers together more tightly in that area. So you could have some areas that are more dense. And if the areas are more dense, that means the fibers are moving together in that area, pulling other fibers with them. And so it could cause it to be distorted. Maybe it could be like puckering on one side or pulling everything in one direction. So that it could change the shape of, it will change the shape of what you're making. So if you want it to be like a nice symmetrical kind of an egg shape, then you would want to work it nice and even. But then later on, when you want to make the eyes, like if we wanted to have an indentation here for eyes, you can see if you just work it in one spot quickly here, you can see how it distorts the fabric, or it distorts this. So now I have this indentation here just from working it like that. So if you want it to be smooth and nice and even, you would want to make sure you're doing it kind of evenly throughout. That make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
Any other questions? And then you would do the same. You would take the blue or whatever color you wanted, cover the bottom half to kind of make the pants, cover the hat, and then cover the head with whatever flesh color you decide to use. Like you could use this roving to cover it, or whatever kind of flesh color that you have chosen. And then you make all the separate pieces. And then they will kind of look like this then when you're done. And then the arms, I kind of do the arms the same way I did the other bit. I just kind of roll it up into like a tube. It's not really a tube because it's not hollow, but kind of like a long cylinder type shape. Then you cover it with the roving because I don't want to see the yarn. And you work it until it's like this. And if you work it on one side and then turn it over and work it on the other side, you can make it flat. If you wanted it to be more round, then you would work it and turn it as you're working it to maintain that round shape. But I think they work out better if they're flat. So I kind of work all on one side, turn it over and work all on the other side, kind of keeping that flatness of it. And it kind of creates this nice arm shape. And then just put a little hand on the bottom. You can attach that hand just like we're attaching everything else. Just kind of for this project, you really don't need this mat so much because you're working directly into your sculpture. Where you're going to need a mat is if you're working something like this, because when you push the needles through this, the needles have to go somewhere. And if you push them on the table, when they hit the table, they're going to break. So if you go like this and they hit the table, you're going to end up breaking your needles. So that's why if you have the mat, you turn on its side. So when you push it through your fibers, they go into the bristles of the mat and they're not going to hit the bottom of the mat. And that's where the mat comes in handy. Or you could use upholstery foam. If you don't want to buy the mat yet and you're making a 3-dimensional sculpture, you can kind of work on your sculpture, being careful that you're not attaching it in a place where you don't want it to be attached, yet. So that's kind of where the mats come in handy. And so making the little hand on it, because it's such a small little piece, I would start it probably just with the fiber like that. And then that's when this little tool can come in handy. So if you're like me, very good chance that you're going to stab your fingers. So anything you can do to kind of protect your fingers. See, and then you lift it up and you can kind of create the shape of a little hand. And then connect it. If you just continue to work it and work it and work it, it will become connected to the point where you really can't separate it anymore. And then you can see here, I worked the red through and it pushed those red fibers all the way through to the other side. So you might not want to see that on the other side. So, you're going to have to be careful. And then what we can do to kind of hide that then would be, we can just, bring the sleeve over it. So if we bring the sleeve over it, then, but every time you're pushing the needles through your project, they're directing the fiber, and that's what can happen. So, and then you can just cut away any, and I would probably keep working this until it was a little bit shaped, a little nicer, and then you can trim away the hand to make it, nice. You could go then in with a needle and thread and sew to indicate fingers. If you wanted to, you can get as detailed and as fancy as you want. There's a lot of, if you Google or go on Pinterest and look up needle felting, there are a lot of artists that make sculptures of like cats and dogs and rabbits and all kinds of animals. They look realistic. They look like a real cat, like the face, everything. It looks 100% real. Like you think it's a real cat. So if you really practice and really get good at it, you can make very, very realistic sculptures. So, but I've never put that much effort into it. So depending on So now I've got the arms. I'm going to cut these arms in half. And then you can decide the placement of the arm, where do you want it? And then attach it by putting some of the same fiber that you made the arm out of and the top half of the gnome, the jacket or the shirt. And just continue working like this, making sure you get it down into the crease. Working all of this fiber. And you want it to look like an arm, so you do want to kind of maintain the shape of the arm here and kind of maintain that the crease as to kind of like, where the arm would be to kind of indicate the shape of the arm. And then you can take time to build up a shoulder if you want to, but frequently the hair and the beard and everything will cover like the top of the shoulder, so you might not need to so much. So that's, quickly, I attach the arm. The more you work on it, the more permanent it will be. If you decide, oh, wait a minute, that's in the wrong place, look how easy it is to just pull it off. So before you set it 100% permanent, then you can double check, and then it's very easy to remove it and to change your mind. Now this one, I've had this one done for several years. And if I wanted to take that arm, I could still rip that arm off if I wanted to. Or you can cut it. I could cut that arm off and put a different arm on. So like if I wanted to do a different, do some type of a different thing, you really can do that. It's very, very easy and very forgiving and very versatile. So, but you can also make them very secure so that you could give this to a child to play with, and with some supervision, they're not going to rip, depending on the child. They probably wouldn't necessarily, it wouldn't fall apart right away unless if they were really being aggressive with it. So any questions about how to make the arms and how to attach them? How are we doing?
Do you think you could use like a sewing pin or a T-pin to sort of check the placement of the arms and other accessories before you felt them down?
Absolutely. You could absolutely do that. You could, stick a pin to hold it in place, and then just take that out probably before you start working. You don't want to, bury that pin in your felt when you're not, when you're finished. You want to make sure you remove it. But yeah, you could sew them in place as well. I like to use like these curved needles. And there we go. This curved needle, you can thread it and then just kind of sew it right in place. So there's lots of different options and different choices of ways to attach it. But it's very straightforward. It's super, super easy. So I encourage everyone, to go ahead and try it. And if you have an idea, you think maybe there could be something else you could do instead, I'm sure it probably would work. Lots of good ideas. Okay. Anything else about that?
Nothing else.
So then I created the feet the same way I created the arms. So I just created this little kind of shape. And there's a couple of things you can do with the feet. You could cut them in half and you have two separate feet. On this one, I didn't cut them in half. I kept them kind of in a horseshoe shape because it makes it easier for them to stand up if they're, it's nice, it's kind of cute if they stand on their own. So you can either cut the feet separately in half, or you can kind of keep this horseshoe shape, whichever you prefer. This one, I cut them in half, so it's more like two separate feet. So that one is done a different way. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. And then you attach the feet the same way. Say you're going to do it like this. And then from the front, it looks like two separate feet. You could sew this in place, or you can take the fiber I would probably use blue fiber to kind of start securing it. And then if you need to go over the shoes with some black fiber to kind of separate and make sure that you're getting a nice clear distinction, then you can go back over it with some black to just kind of make sure everything looks nice. But that's kind of the way I would attach the feet. And then you try to stand your gnome up, and if it stands up nicely, if it doesn't, then you can go back and kind of make the feet a little bit more balanced. So that way it's kind of cute if they stand up on their own. So you might want to build it up a little bit on one side or the other to make it a little bit more balanced. Any questions?
I know that sometimes for like knitted or crocheted toys, you could put like weights in the base so they stand up. But for needle felting, do you think that would interfere with the ability to felt onto it?
I did that one time to a large needle felted bear that I made, and it stands about 1.5 feet tall. And I filled it on the inside with a bag of like beans to make it kind of like a bean bag, just to make it extra heavy. And when you're felting it, you just have to make sure that you're not pushing your needles into whatever you've weighted it down with, because it would probably break your needles. So if the center of this, there was like a weight in the middle of it, instead of when I'm working on it, instead of pressing the needle straight in like that, you might just always want to go on an angle so that you're not going into the center of whatever you're weighting it down with. But that certainly is a good idea. I've done that with this one time, and it worked out really well. Any other questions? So
Nothing so far.
For his belt, I just used a regular strand of yarn and just felted it in place. And then that way, it gives it a nice, you could get fancy and do some type of a little buckle. You could sew something on later to make it look, fancier, or you can just leave it plain like this. So it's totally up to you. And then attaching the head. So you can decide kind of where you want the head to be. Now there's a couple of different ways to attach the head. You could just kind of work this fiber in kind of the neck area, and attach this fiber to the head, and then attach it to the body, and keep kind of working it that way to the head and then to the body, and keep going around. And that takes a little bit of time, but it's certainly a way to secure it, and it is a very secure method. Or that's how I used to always do it, but lately I've been sewing them in place, which makes it much stronger and much more secure. So you just kind of hold it in place. And I'm going to put some yarn on this needle. I can get it through. Probably normally I would use a smaller yarn. I'm going to use blue yarn just so you kind of see what I'm doing. I would never use blue yarn to sew in these colors. You would want to probably either use red or the flesh tone. And if you don't know how to sew, that's fine, because it's not going to show. So if it's messy, it doesn't make any difference. So it's going through the head and then out on the body over here. And you can see it's a great big stitch, which is fine. And then you kind of want to make sure you're keeping your needle on the bottom of the head so it's not really going to show. Pull it through and then bring it through to the body. And these curved needles are nice, but if you don't have a curved needle, you can just use a regular straight needle. You could even use a regular yarn needle. I've got this large-eyed blunt needle, and it'll go through this felt pretty well. You kind of have to tease it through a little bit. But again, if you're not a seamstress, if you don't like to sew, it doesn't have to be neat. and I'm doing this deliberately kind of fast and sloppy just to show you that it doesn't matter how neat it looks. What you want is it to be on here securely. Oops, sorry. So it's not going to fall off. That's the goal. But you do want to kind of keep your stitches kind of close to the neck area. So I just went around one time, and that is already pretty secure on there. And if you go around twice, then it's going to be really secure. And then you can kind of wrap it like this to kind of make a little neck area. And I'm not going to secure this because I want to use this for another sample in another class. But you would tie a very secure knot, and then it's already very securely on there. It's not coming off. So if I went around one more time, it would be very, very, very densely attached and be very permanent. So, and then to make it look nice then afterwards, you just go through with the same red and cover up any seams that are showing here. And then you would cover up any seams on the head with any flesh tone that you have left over. So it's really nice. You don't have to have nice, neat, even stitches. You just want it to be secure. Any questions about how to attach the head, how to sew it, or felt it in place?
I was just thinking that you could also cover up any visible stitching or whatever with a tiny little scarf or something.
Well, usually what happens is the beard is going to cover it. Depending on how you want yours to look, I tend to put a lot of hair, crazy hair and beards and mustaches. And so mostly the head you don't get a lot of, you don't really see much of the face. So it doesn't really matter if it's super neat or not. So, and then to start creating, I don't have any more of this same flesh color with me right now. So I'm just going to start building up some of the features of the face with this lighter colored roving. And so to make the nose, you can just do like a little ball of roving, and then just, you can see how I'm just attaching it kind of loosely. Like that. So that looks horrible, right? But then after you kind of go over it and make it more dense, then you can shape it into the shape of the nose that you want, or you can just have a little ball. But it really condenses down a lot. So even for a tiny little like nose shape, you might end up using a lot more roving or yarn than you think, because it does keep compressing down into nothing. And if this were the same color as the flesh tone as what the head was, it would, blend in really nicely. But this is a good way to demonstrate. Like if you ran out, say you had this flesh tone and you ran out, or you gave it away or something, you don't have any more, you can just cover over this entire face with another color. Or if you change your mind, like, oh, I didn't want to use this color, I wish I would have used this other color, then you can cover over the whole thing. So it's very forgiving. You can make any changes you want as you're working. So as you can see, it's just kind of shaping up into kind of a nose shape. And you can make it as detailed and as specific as you want, or you don't even have to put on a nose if you don't want to. And then for the eyes, again, you can get as detailed as you want or not at all. But I'm just going to use this blue yarn. See, I'm not even combing it out into roving. I'm just kind of directing it where I want it, just because I'm making like these little tiny beady eyes. And then that's all you have to do for eyes, or you can make them very detailed if you wanted to. Okay. Any questions about making the eyes or the nose, adding features? You can really work, like if you wanted to, like I could work to kind of make an eye socket, kind of give it some shape. Just keep working into the same spot over and over. So you can see that's really created kind of an indentation. And then that, when you make the eye socket like that, it kind of also creates a cheekbone right here. So, and then put the eye down in that eye socket. Trim off any extras that you have. Maybe he's blushing, you can put a little pink on the cheeks. And if you take more time, you can, really, I'm just doing this as fast as I can just to show you how to do it. But, and then if it's a little too much, then you can layer it with lighter. And then that way you can create like depth of color by layering different colors over it. I think that looks nice because I put that white over that dark pink and it kind of creates this nice. So that's how you can do the face. You can really get involved in making them very detailed. This guy here that I made. This one's much larger, but you can really see like the eye. It's better without that light. Maybe it's better without that light. You can see the eye, how I kind of outlined it, and I made an iris and a pupil. The lip, you can get a nice kind of a detail. I put a highlight on the lower lip. This nose is kind of like really shaped like a cartoon nose or a caricature. I mean, it's not realistic, but it does have a lot of shape and dimension, and it's very firm. So you got the neck, the clothes. You can really do, I love to make crazy hair on them. I feel like gnomes would probably have different kinds of braids and big braids and little braids. And so you can really get quite detailed if you want to. And then for the mouth, again, I would just take, you can just take like a strand of yarn. If you want to do a mouth, and then you could do lips, or you could just do like a little indication of a little smile or a little mouth. Just kind of trim off the edges. But if you're going to put a beard on it, you might not, want to put too much detail on it. And then for the hair, if you want to attach hair, sometimes I make little braids like this in advance, and then you can put them on. So like maybe he's going to have a beard that's braided, or just put this braid. Maybe he has just one braid right in the middle. I don't know. How do you think? What do you think a gnome would wear their hair like, Claire? How do you think a gnome would?
I don't know. I guess it depends on what type of gnome they are.
Yeah, right. So like you could, I think a gnome might have a braid right down the middle just for fun and kind of push it out of the way. And then just any
Like your
scraps
gnomes.
you have. What?
Your gnomes are very inspired by the dwarves in Lord of the Rings.
Yes. Well, gnomes and dwarves are actually very different, but they could have similar style, right?
Yes.
So then there's this, just this, and I'm using some different colors and textures of yarn that I've kind of wound together. And I think that makes fun hair for a gnome. I don't think gnomes would have perfectly silk, smooth, nicely brushed hair. I mean, they're working out in the forest, they're working at the trees and the animals. They probably get quite messy. At least you can attach the hair. I like to attach it in layers so that way it looks nice. I think it gives it a little nicer look than if you just attach it all in one kind of clump. And then if you lay that over, you can kind of felt that in place so it doesn't separate out. And then you can kind of create a mustache.
just to let you know, we're under 10 minutes left for class.
We're almost finished, actually. If there are any questions on anything about needle felting at all, any questions about anything we've covered today, or whoops, I just stopped myself. I'm gonna be very careful. You get your blood, sweat, and tears into these, I'm telling you. It's a true story about the blood. Any questions, Claire, about any needle felting questions at all? Nothing?
No questions. Sounds like we've got a couple people very excited to try this. I hope they do.
And I will encourage you, it is very easy. It's really a lot of fun. It does take time. It's not immediate, like super immediate gratification, but these projects do work up really fast. So, you know, if you have like a long afternoon or a couple of evenings to work on something, you can really make, well, again, depending on how detailed you want it or how large of a project you want to make, they do work up quite fast. Lots of fun to make. Anything you can think of, you can make. So I really like gnomes. I think they're super cute, but once you learn how to make these basic shapes, I mean, you could put, instead of making it into a gnome, you could put ears on it and make it a rabbit or a bear. You could, you know, shape the body a little bit different and make it into, you know, anything you want. So it's really endless, the different you know, things you could make, the different ideas you have.
We do have a couple questions. Amanda wants to know if you have a recommended supply list for beginners. I'm going to go ahead and put the handout in the chat because that's got everything that Darren introduced at the beginning of class as to what you'll need.
Yeah. You know, oh, go ahead, Claire.
And then second question, Bonnie wanted to know, is there curly wool?
Yes. So my recommended supply list, I work for Lion Brand, so I got all my tools from Lion Brand, but I think I'm pretty sure Michaels.com has most of these. If they don't have the Clover brand, they have a lot of other needle felting tools which are available. So I would check Michaels.com and lionbrand.com first, if it were me. And then maybe your local craft stores or yarn stores would probably have some. The roving, other needle felt instructors are going to want you to use 100% pure wool roving, and they will tell you that's the only thing that'll work. But I'm here to tell you that it's not the only thing that'll work, and you can use all types of different fibers. And because roving is, sometimes it's merino or cashmere or angora, it can be very, very expensive. I mean, it could be, it's an outrageous price. So you just want to make sure that if you do buy roving, that you're just getting kind of like a pure, kind of like a basic standard wool, like you're not buying anything fancy. The curly wool is really a lot of fun. And I think mostly they're just called curly locks. So they're just like locks of wool that grow naturally curly on the sheep or the goat. And I have some that I bought that they're like a foot long. So they make really cute, you could make beards or hair on a doll, be really, really pretty. There's some of them that are much shorter, that are like 3 or 4 or 5 inches long, that work up really cute on something. So like the curly ones would be very, very cute for like embellishing with, I think. I probably wouldn't use those for felting because they would lose their appeal of being curly, like it would if you made the body out of them. But I really love that curly stuff. It's really fun. But I wanted to show you, this is a different class, but I just wanted to show you what's also available. This is made out of 100% acrylic, and it's just a little drawing that I did. I used this one. You do have to have the mat, and just with my needles and some scraps of yarn, and I blended them with my blending brushes. And you know, you can draw a little picture. This is cherry blossoms. And then this is a phone case. You know, a phone can go right in there, a little cell phone. So you just kind of want to measure it around your cell phone. But any felting is such a versatile hobby and craft that you can, anything you can think of, you can pretty much make with felting. So I think we have 4 minutes left. Any other questions at all? Taking all questions.
We do have a request to see the other gnome. I asked for some clarification if that was the one you were working on during class or one of your examples.
I have a whole collection. See, and I think it's fun if they have a backpack. Gnomes always have a backpack because they're always working. I put little feathers on his hat to make him cute. This is this one I didn't put as much detail in because I was making it fast for class to just show you don't have to put a lot of detail. Then there's this guy. I like this guy. One time I took these on a trip. I've taken these on vacation before and like pose them in places and take pictures of them like they're the traveling gnome. I think that's cute.
Good question. Can these items be washed?
I would spot clean them and wash them. Honestly, if they got dirty, I would probably, depending on what the nature of the dirt was, but I might just cover over them. Like if the face was dirty, I might just put new felt on it. If it got dirty with something, you could cut it away and then rebuild it up with the same color again. So I wouldn't put them in the washing machine, I don't think. But you could kind of spray. If you're using 100% wool and you put them in the washing machine, then they're going to felt even more and they'll probably felt unevenly and kind of come out really misshapen. Of course, this hair and stuff is going to felt if it's wool, and even if it's acrylic, it's going to kind of get all matted, and which might be the perfect look for a gnome. But I would probably just kind of spot clean them, cut away anything that's dirty, and kind of remake them. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Anything else?
Jerry had a good suggestion about getting like leather finger guards or those leather thimbles.
Yes, I actually have one out here I was going to show, but now I don't know what happened to it. I always forget to put it on though, or I lose it. Like right now, I've got so much stuff on my desk, I can't find it. Yeah, but you can buy leather finger guards, or if you have an old pair of gloves, you could probably cut out the fingers off the gloves and then use the fingers. You really only need it on this one finger because that's kind of where you're holding and you're kind of working close to that finger. Anything else? I've lost my finger guard.
True, these tools only work if you know where they are and put them on before you start.
Mm-hmm. Oh well, yeah, I do have one though. I do recommend them. Yeah, they're very nice. If you don't lose them, it's helpful. Anything else?
I'm going to go ahead and put the handout in the chat one more time in case anybody didn't get that. And just remind everybody that this class was being recorded, so it'll be available on the Michael's YouTube channel in about 24 hours, I believe. And then if you want to join us next Monday, if you're a knitter, we are having a class on doing socks from the toe up at any gauge. So if you need to get some slippers ready for the cold weather here, you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fun class. So if you've never made socks before, it's for beginners. So if you've never made socks before, that's a great way to learn. So. Okay. Anything else?
Clarify, it's for beginner sock knitters. You do need to know how to knit.
You do need to know how to knit and knit in the round, and you need to know how to purl. But yeah, if you know how to knit and you want to try socks, it's the great. If you don't know how to knit, it might be fun to watch and it might inspire you to learn how to knit. So yeah, but to make the socks, you do need to know how to knit. Absolutely. Okay, anything else? You can see I've got quite the mess going on here. I've got gnome body parts. I've got gnome body parts and everywhere. All right, thanks for coming to class. Have a great night.